All right. Let's get this party started. Hello, I'm Father Timothy Matkin, and this is Matins on the St. Francis podcast. This is number 27. And today we're considering the question, is America becoming a banana republic? Is she already? Is she headed that way? Maybe we can figure that out. First of all, thank you for watching and or listening on Apple or Spotify. If you would give us a review, give us a thumbs up, give us a share, help us get noticed out there. We appreciate that very much. We also want to begin with prayer. Oh, and if you want to contact me, you can, of course, comment down below on YouTube or send me an email at frmatkin@priest.com. Let's begin with a prayer from the 2019 prayer book for the nation. So this is number 39 in the back in the section of additional prayers and collects and so forth. Let us pray. Almighty God, who hast given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of thy favor and glad to do thy will. Bless our land with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure conduct. Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride, arrogance, and from every evil way. Defend our liberties, and fashion into one united people the multitudes brought hither out of many kindreds and tongues. Endue with the spirit of wisdom those to whom in thy name we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home, and that through obedience to thy law we may show forth thy praise among the nations of the earth. In the time of prosperity fill our hearts with thankfulness, and in the day of trouble suffer not our trust in thee to fail. All of which we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And I would, I just kind of went looking for a prayer that would fit the theme of the topic for today, and turned to the back and saw what prayers for the nations were there. But I think it's fortuitous that this prayer is there and not only fits this topic, but is a good subject for meditation. A lot of good thoughts in there, comforting thoughts, I think, and also challenging thoughts. We've been given this good land as a heritage, but we have to be worthy of it. We humbly beseech thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of thy favor and glad to do thy will. So go back and look at that prayer again and use that as an object and a tool for meditation. I think I will do that myself. And perhaps as much as I consider the question here, might also get some comfort and encouragement as well. All right, is America a banana republic? Thank you for putting up with a little break over Lent. I think we had 2 Lenten episodes, one about the precepts of the church and one about fasting. But other than that, we kind of took a little Lenten break. And I thought about this topic when President Trump was indicted. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to talk about that. But I didn't want to sort of spoil Holy Week and Easter. So I thought, well, let's put that off a little bit and we'll come back to it. I've been thinking about this question actually, from the Bush years, the Obama years, perhaps. Definitely the Obama years, but the sort of the formulation of it goes back to around the turn of the century and of the millennium. I don't like this new century all that much. It's been a bit of a downer. And I went into the new century, the new millennium, optimistic and looking forward to the future. Things seem to be on the right trajectory, on the upswing. You had the end of the Cold War in the 90s, and you had also some positive movements in the culture. You had a strong pushback and turnout for the sanctity of marriage. You had a strong pushback against debts, debt spending, and so on. And for me, that was always a big thing, in the 80s, in the Reagan years, we had some large deficits that were manageable at the time. But the problem was, the culture was that it was just looked at as something that there were no consequences for, that you could just write a blank check forever on and not worry about. And that's just simply not how money works, not how the world works. We can't do that with our own family finances without running into trouble sooner or later. And the same thing goes on even a large scale for countries, because you get into problems later on when you try to deal with that situation and fix it with runaway inflation and printing money and so on, which we've been doing like crazy. In the 90s also you had, talking about the deficit, you had actually a few years, I believe, of surplus, which I was amazed at. I thought, well, maybe we could get to a balanced budget within a decade or something. Like, no, how about next year? And so the new Congress that came in whatever it was, 96 or so, I think, just got it done. And we were all beneficiaries of it. And I remember in the presidential election in 2000, there was talk about, well, what do we do with the deficit or the surplus now? And Bush had the idea of at least giving some kind of rebate to the taxpayers, which ordinarily I would favor, but I'm thinking, well, that's nice, but we also have this debt that's hanging over us, and we need to start paying it down, paying it back. But in any case, that situation was over pretty soon. You also had talk about a peace dividend. We can cut back on military spending now that the Cold War is over. And actually, sometimes I like to, when I'm working on investments or something, I'll put something on kind of in the background. I'll go to YouTube and find some old news thing from the past or a political debate. And I was kind of in the political debate run. And so I put on Bush versus Gore. I forget which debate it was, but I was working on my thing, and then I looked up when I heard them talking, because I was just astounded because I had totally forgotten the context, because in hindsight, looking back with 9/11 and all that followed, and so many people complaining about Bush as a warmonger and so on, I forgot that it was the opposite situation before. So Bush was the dove, and Gore was the hawk. So Gore was saying, no, we need to be the world's policeman. We can't cut back now. The world is as dangerous as it ever was. And he was right. But then he sort of oddly flip-flopped after that. But of course, things had happened since then. And then George Bush was saying that, no, it's time to cut back now. We're not supposed to be the world's policeman. We need to put this peace dividend toward other things and debt servicing and improving our own people, our own country, and so on. And of course, then 9/11 happened. Don't like the new century that we're in. And war became just a de facto way of life. So we've been involved in foreign wars ever since, really. Anyway, getting back to the idea of the banana republic. So debt service and debt runaway spending has always been a big concern of mine going into the new century. And then you come across with all other kinds of things, ongoing and increasing political corruption on both sides. And nothing ever seems to really resolve about that. Let's turn to the University of South Carolina. There was a political scientist, Matt Wilson. What's a banana republic? A political scientist explains. And as far as I'm aware, the term comes from O. Henry in one of his novels. He says, when someone mentions a banana republic, they're referring to a small, poor, politically unstable country that is weak, because of an excessive reliance on one crop and foreign funding. The term originated as a way to describe the experience of many countries in Central America, whose economics and politics were dominated by U.S.-based banana exporters at the turn of the 20th century. After the FBI's August 2022 search of the residence of former President Donald Trump, some Republicans compared the U.S. to a banana republic. And that comparison's it goes back way before that, and it's been continuing on after that. And in the wake of January 6th, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, a surge of tweets did the same. Political instability within the U.S. has little to do with fruit, so why is that term being used? Subverting democracy to keep the cash flowing. In the 1880s, the Boston Fruit Company, which later became the United Fruit Company and then Chiquita, began importing bananas from Jamaica and launched a successful campaign to popularize them in the U.S. As demand for bananas grew, large companies made deals with governments across Central America to fund infrastructure projects in exchange for land and policies that would allow them to expand production. The growers often depended on authoritarian rule to protect land concessions and quell labor unrest that might shrink their profits. Sometimes they would actively subvert democracy to reassert influence. The, I'm not sure how to say this word, Cuamel Fruit Company, for example, supported a coup in Honduras in 1911 that replaced its president with someone more aligned with U.S. interests. Another well-known example is the 1954 CIA orchestrated plot on behalf of the United Fruit Company against Guatemalan President Jacobo Arbenz. That coup ended the first real period of democracy that Guatemala had known. The tight relationship between banana exporters and repressive and corrupt leaders ultimately undermined development in the region, exacerbated inequality, and left Central American countries weak and misgoverned, and I would add open to communist infiltration. Hyperbolic rhetoric? Responding to the events that unfolded leading up to and during the January 6th attack on the Capitol, current and former government officials commented that they resembled the instability of banana republics that were known for ignoring election results and overturning those results with coups, which is what happened in Costa Rica in 1917. When American and political commentators use the term, they're often trying to conjure up images of corruption, repression, and failures to stop executive overreach. They're equating government officials with tin-pot dictators, supported by foreign interests who acted with impunity to govern by force and prosecute or persecute their opponents. A large number of Republican politicians invoked the term in response to the FBI's raid of Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. But the comparison isn't apt. It's true that outgoing leaders are more likely to be investigated and punished by their political opponents in countries with strong executives and weak judiciaries. However, holding elected officials accountable for their actions and not allowing anyone to be above the law is actually characteristic of a healthy democracy. The article published from The Conversation under, that's just attributing, it says this article was previously published somewhere else, from The Conversation. And I agree with some things and disagree with others. The whole thing about holding elected officials accountable is a sign of healthy democracy. That's true. The difficulty is whether it really is holding people accountable or whether it's simply just a tool of political power. So you can have both things, and it depends on what the reason is and how it's applied as to whether it's a healthy thing or an unhealthy thing. So, for example, with the whole indictment of Donald Trump, the oddity is that, and Ted Cruz has done a great job explaining this on his podcast, the oddity is that it comes from the 2016 election. And in that case, you have basically the same crime being committed by his opponent. But of course, because of who's in charge and who's in power, only one person is looked to as prosecutable for that kind of crime. So Hillary Clinton had basically done the same type of thing, a misapplication or fabrication of data entry errors about money spent for the cooked up dossier that was fuel for an investigation of her political opponent, committed in the same jurisdiction, New York, at the same time, and of course, never prosecuted. And of course, others had looked at the same situation with Donald Trump and turned it down. So the previous Manhattan DA had looked at it and said there's no there. And the feds, with the Mueller investigation, had looked at it and said, well, there's no there. But now you have the current DA who says, oh, there's some there, and wants to prosecute. And really, I don't think they're so much interested in getting a conviction, although they certainly might, given that jurisdiction. But I think more it's about simply election interference. If you can manipulate the topic of conversation during the election, if you can simply keep the headlines full of talk and images of one political party and candidate going in and out of court every day and so on, then you have been able to manipulate an election, which seems like a very banana republic kind of thing. But the characters of our leaders also, to me, have a kind of banana republic kind of feel. So that first really came to my attention with Obama and all the kind of very uncomfortable messianic kinds of things that were swirling around Obama, which I don't know if he really cultivated or not. He certainly didn't speak against it. And I don't know if he instigated it, but all of the songs, the kind of chanting, Obama, Obama, having the little children sing the song in praise of our glorious leader and so on, very uncomfortable. And then you have, he's followed by a candidate who says, I'm the only one who can fix all of our problems, and you have to turn to me, and only has a kind of tepid grasp on exactly what constitutional government is like and how it works, although he seemed to be a fast learner. So I had written a blog post back when I did blogging. This is from March 1st, 2016. And I said, what disturbs me about Donald Trump? So this was kind of carrying over some previous concerns I'd already had for about the past decade, through the end of the Bush years and throughout the Obama years, and then looking at this new election cycle. So this is what I wrote back then, 2016. And this was, of course, before the election. I've wrestled for months about whether to write this. Now I'm breaking my own rule not to publicly take sides about candidates in political races, although I'm happy to talk about moral and cultural issues in the political sphere on which the church has something to say. Maybe we can file this under culture. Last summer, I was listening to an interview with Mark Steyn, who was talking about a speech Donald Trump gave that afternoon. He noted that Trump was a savvy businessman who has looked at the Republican Party and figured that it's ripe for a hostile takeover. And I would interject that this, interestingly, both for Biden and for Trump, the third time was the charm. So both of them had run for president twice before and gotten nowhere. But the third time was the charm. So Mark Steyn says, as a savvy businessman, Trump correctly saw that the party was ripe for a hostile takeover. They were playing clips of his speech, and Steyn was summarizing Trump's shtick as, quote, "It's going to be great, folks. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be huge. Don't worry about the details. Just vote for me, and the trains will run on time again." And then Steyn observed, is basically all that strong man banana republic sort of stuff. For those who may not be familiar, a banana republic refers to a stereotypical, politically unstable, corrupt socialist country in Latin America, drowning in debt, with a large oppressed working class dominated by an elite class and run by a strongman dictator. That description is becoming eerily familiar. Trump's solution to this problem is to become the strongman, kick out the Latins. It's a good solution for Trump, not so much for the rest of us. There's plenty not to like about Donald Trump. I don't think he's a racist or a xenophobe or some other sensational things he's being accused of. Yet I've never seen such an immature personality in American politics. Frankly, he's disgusting. But that's not the bad part. The idea that America, much less conservatives, would want a thrice-married, repeatedly philandering, perpetually bankrupt casino man who threatens trade wars, vigilance against the press, and massive governmental projects, and who seems to believe that belittling and insulting other Americans, particularly women, will make America great again, and who can't even be consistent in his own politics and beliefs from one paragraph to the next in his own speeches, as our head of state, is perplexing and demoralizing, to say the least. And I will say, in hindsight, he did get better as he went along in terms of being consistent, of having a political philosophy. He was all over the place when he first got started. In another era, he would have been, and was recently as 5 years ago, dismissed as a boob by the voters. What has changed? Trump hasn't so much changed as we have. We have become frustrated, angry, and desperate. Some of our problems have increased exponentially, particularly our national debt, economic stagnation, and our diminished standing in the world. Of course, all of those have gotten exponentially worse since then, almost 10 years ago. Let's see. Like a declining empire, we yearn for the glory days of old to be restored, and the normal ways of accomplishing that goal don't seem to be working. We want an authoritarian, a strong man. That's the only solution to the prospect of national ruin, and he's drawing support from across the board. I was shocked to see a libertarian fan of Ron Paul say on Facebook the other day that it might be time for a strong man as president. And we're willing to overlook his faults if he will deliver on the promised restoration of glory. But that's not his potential presidency that disturbs so much as his candidacy and popularity, and how that reflects on us, much like the unnerving messianic campaign of Barack Obama, or the childlike hokum heard at the rallies of Bernie Sanders. I'm not saying that he couldn't get elected, or that he couldn't even have a good run as president. Ironically, if he is ultimately successful as an outsider taking over the system, it will be because, like a good boss, he hires insiders to get the job done. And there was some of that, and there was some also huge inadequacy in that regard, looking back on the Trump administration. But I fear we will have perhaps been fatally compromised in the process. Leaders whose words we cannot trust because he's negotiating, and whose competence we cannot rely upon because he'll hire the smartest people to get the job done, and whose behavior is indecent because that stuff doesn't matter, he's not the pastor-in-chief, will be the kind of leader we henceforth expect and deserve. Cecil Rhodes famously said to fellow citizens of an empire on the verge of decline, "Remember that you are Englishmen and have consequently won first prize in the lottery of life." I used to think the same thing about being born an American. Now I'm not sure if that matters anymore. What disturbs me about Donald Trump is not so much Donald Trump. He's only a mirror. What disturbs me is the reflection. So are we a banana republic? I think we're definitely headed that way. Do we qualify yet? That's hard to say, because we never had a banana republic that's also a superpower. And that's the odd situation that we are in. Basically, I think the comparison might be better to be made with a declining empire. The British Empire, of course, basically fell apart, is only a shadow of its former self. Fell apart across the 20th century. The decline of the Roman Empire took much longer. We're technically not an empire, although we have engaged in imperial-like things from time to time. We do try to influence our own hemisphere as much as possible to reflect our strategic interests. And that is even extended across the world. And basically, the Cold War was two superpowers trying to influence countries around them to protect their own national vital interests. One of the things also that I think is importantly and perhaps decisively different from the state of the United States and the typical banana republic is that in the banana republic, the Constitution is written in pencil. In America, not so much. But, of course, it all comes down to those who interpret the Constitution. And the more that gets away from the letter of the law, substituting an ever-evolving spirit of the law in its place, the more the ink of the Constitution becomes pencil-like. In some ways, we've done better in that regard. In some ways, we've gotten worse. We've gotten back more to the Constitution in some ways. We've gotten further away from it in others. It seems to still play a decisive role, however, in our national conversation about how we live our common life and order ourselves. So we're still there, not quite in Banana Republic territory, but definitely on a slide. There's an old Mormon proverb or something like that, or prophecy about one day the Constitution will hang by a thread. I forget if that was a part of some kind of retribution for the murder of Joseph Smith lore. But in any case, it may be that one day our Constitution will hang by a thread. We'll see. All of this, I'm sure, sounds very demoralizing for those who might be listening and following along. I'll close with this, maybe another 5 minutes. I've kind of come to terms with the idea of American decline. Not that I want it for any reason whatsoever. Not that I want to facilitate it. Not that I won't fight back against it. But I've gained a certain detachment that came, I guess probably about the middle of the Obama years. I was very concerned about the skyrocketing deficit and debt. And then the Republicans got a man who is basically a, what would you call it, a finance makeover artist. You know, his job, basically, was to come in and take over a company, not hostile takeover, but lead a company to reorganize itself and become profitable again. Governor Romney. And so that's what he did as a businessman, again and again and again. And I thought, well, this is perfect. This is exactly what we need. We need somebody who can come in and cut the fat and reorganize things and get us on the right track. We're headed in the wrong place. We need to turn around some things and tweak others. This is God's perfect solution. And then it didn't happen. And then I came to terms with the idea that maybe the universe will unfold as it should, and we should have faith, as Spock said in Star Trek VI. And that, the world doesn't hang on every single election. And that if it's part of God's will that America has its bright moment and then fades, okay. There will always be people here as long as the world is here. That doesn't mean that America will always be here. Things will be different 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now. And God is still on his throne. And we can serve him no matter what the situation is. anyway, I'll leave with you with that, and go back to that prayer in the prayer book. It's number 39 for our nation. I think I'll do that too. It's a good tool for meditation. God bless you. We'll probably maybe see you next week and talk about GAFCON. Who knows? We'll see you then.